Hi, I'm Marcia Lehman, and I'm a Knox County Master Gardener. Today we're going to be talking and pruning Distylium. I really want you to look at the handout because this Distylium is a hybrid. The original Distylium comes from China and gets to be a humongous shrub, I mean 15 feet by 15 feet. It's a big shrub. But Michael Durr and some of his colleagues at Georgia did some hybridizing with that original Chinese Distylium and some members of the witch hazel, and they came up with 5 varieties of compact or dwarf Distylium. And this is one of those. At maturity, it will be 3 to 4 feet wide by 3 to 4 feet tall. So it's a nice evergreen shrub. Now, you're probably noticing that this doesn't look particularly green. And there's good news and there's bad news in that. The bad news is the Arctic blast that we had back at Christmas time really did a number on the vegetation. You can see tips of brown leaves, and when I tug on them, they come off. So we had some tip burn, particularly in the foliage. And it's now, what, April 13th? At the end of March, I thought this was dead. It had no leaves on it. So the green that you see has all come in the last 2 weeks. So the good news is it's not dead. And the good news is it gives you a chance to see the structure of the Distylium plant. It tends to be a single or, sometimes there's a second stem. It puts out lots of branches. And now that you can see the structure, it's easy to go in and make minimal cuts. You're not pruning really for shape unless somebody else has badly pruned it. What you're really pruning for is the 4 Ds: dead, diseased, damaged, or dysfunctional. And so far, I've not seen anything that's truly dead. I will continue to follow this plant over the next several weeks, and as it continues to leaf out, anything that truly is dead will become obvious. So at the moment, what I'm looking for is I'm looking down into the plant and looking for things that are crossing, rubbing, and would create a problem in the future. So here I've got a little branch that comes up and goes through the fork of another branch, and it has something that comes over here and rubs. So if I follow that back, I'm going to take that off at the lowest possible spot. And I got rid of several crossing things with one little snip. Again, Distylium needs minimal pruning. So that's another benefit of it. And here I've got one that's crossing, so I'll take that off. But this is the beauty of it not having all its leaves, that we can see these crossing branches. And, now I'm looking down, and I really, what'd I do? 3 little snips. That's not dead, still wiggles. I'm basically done. So I'm going to let this Distylium leaf out over the next month or so. I'll continue to watch it, and I'll come back, and if in fact there's anything truly dead, then I'll take it off at that time. So now we're going to move to a second spot where there are some more Distylium. They're in the sun, they have irrigation, so they've been well watered. They were planted at the same time, the fall of 2018. You will not be able to see the structure like we could see here. So let's move to the other specimens. Here we are with 2 more Distylium. I'm going to focus on the plant on the left here. Planted at the same time as the ones I just showed you, the fall of 2018. And again, Distylium needs minimal pruning. I mean, this is a plant that you can basically ignore. And for the first 3 years, it was ignored. I mean, it's here in the sun, it's got irrigation, it grew well. And last year, remember I said they get 3 to 4 feet wide, 3 to 4 feet tall. They were planted 4 feet apart. And last year they got big enough that they started to touch. And someone decided to come in and prune them so that they no longer touched. And the end result of that was a bad pruning job. Because rule number one on a shrub like Distylium, never use hedge trimmers. And that is exactly what they used. So when you look at this shrub, you can basically see where it used to be, and they came in and mounded it with hedge trimmers, and pruning stimulates growth. So what did it do? It sent up all these new shoots. And if we can zoom in, I mean, here's a spot where it was pruned, and it does a miniature version of what crepe myrtle does. You have this big fist where it was sheared with hedge trimmers, and then it puts out 5 or 6 new shoots. Well, that's just not good. So what do we do with that? We do the same thing that we would do if we were renovating a crepe myrtle. We'll come in and we'll take off the spindly little ones and keep 2, maybe, well, probably 2 of the best. Now, I'll try and open this up. Here's the other thing that happened in shearing. Here is a stub that is easily 4 inches long with absolutely no leaves on it. That's bad news. So we'll take that off back where there was some growth coming out. If we can zoom in over here, here's another one, a stub with a shoot, but it's all dead. So the fact that someone last year decided to shear this thing now says it needs significant pruning, and it's a cleanup pruning. You would not normally have to do this to Distylium. So rule number one is don't prune it unless it's dead, damaged, diseased, or dysfunctional. So I'm going to come through this plant and look for all those places where it got sheared last year and reduce the number of new growth shoots that came out from where it was sheared, which is really a thinning job. And normally Distylium doesn't need to be thinned, but it makes a major pruning task to now clean up what was good intentions but a bad pruning job last year. So I'm going to pause, I'm going to work on this a little bit, and then I'll come back and give you some idea of just how many cuts I've had to make. What I've done is I went in to find all those places where it was sheared last year and thinned out the multiple stems that grew out of that pruning point. What I want to show you is, and I made about 20 of those cuts. What I want to show you now is another bad pruning technique, and that's leaving, if you look at this, this comes up, there's a branch here, and when it was sheared, we have this stub. Nothing is going to grow on this stub, and in fact, this is likely to decay over time and become an entry point for insects and diseases. So whenever I've, in the process, was also looking for these stubs, when we find those stubs, we come in and we take that off. Now that's a small one, and now that I've got that out of the way, let me show you a bigger one. If we can see this, this is easily 4 or 5 inches, and that needs to be cleaned up as well. So there's probably 10 to 12 of those type of stubs that I took off while I was pruning and saved a couple to show you. So if I step back now, basically what I've done is to clean up the bad pruning that was done last year. And you can still see, you know, where the shrub was last year, and when it got pruned, it then put out all this new growth. So the last thing I'm going to do is I am not going to shear it back, because that will just do the same thing again, but I will come in and do some tip pruning. So for instance here's our last leaves. I'm just going to take off the last 6 inches or so. And again, because of what was done last year, this becomes a major pruning cleanup. So rule number one, never shear your Distylium, or you end up creating a whole lot more work for yourself. So I'm going to come in and clean up some of these tips to reduce a little bit of the height, but I am not taking it back to where it was, or I will just recreate the problem. So I'll do a little bit more tip cleanup, and then we'll come back and show you this shrub versus the one that's right next to it. I've finished pruning this plant, and again, since it only gets 3 or 4 feet tall, this is another case where you can come in and look down in. So I did take off a few little spindly things that were coming up in the center, but I also came and I tip pruned these, so it's a bit shorter. But on the airflow and sunshine, here's my handout, and I'm hoping that you can still see the handout through the shrub, or you can at least tell there's a sheet of white paper here. On the other hand, if I come over here to this shrub, which I have not yet pruned, you probably cannot see this. It will need to have the same type of pruning that we did here. But if we back up and just look at both of them side by side, you know, the height is not that much different, but you can see that this is a little thinner and doesn't have quite as many of the spiky shoots. This got sheared last year, so it, as I say, it needs the same type of pruning that this needs. One last thing I want to show you is this is one that I took off really low, but you can see where it got sheared last year. Here is a bit of a stub, and then it triggered all this extra growth, which comes out, and some of it wants to curl around. And so as we were looking at this, it was like, oh, just take it off all the way back. So the beauty of Distylium is they need minimal pruning until and unless you do something wrong, like take hedge trimmers to them. So if there's one thing you take away from today, please, 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 never take hedge trimmers to your Distylium. It's a minimal maintenance plant. Take advantage of that and just pay attention to the 4 Ds, dead disease, damaged, dysfunctional. You know, that allows you to come in and take out crossing rubbing branches. We found one of those. We found probably one of everything in doing this today. But this is Distylium. It's become really popular as a replacement for boxwoods, as boxwoods have been succumbing to boxwood blight. And as you can see, this one made it through the Arctic blast with minimal damage. There's a few brown leaves compared to the first one that I showed you that was in a shadier spot, not as much water access. So yeah, it's rated zone 7 to 10, but it made it through the Arctic blast with minimal damage. And so normally it would be a really quick, let me come out and look at it, check the 4 Ds, and you're done. So again, look at the handout for the additional references. This is Distylium. Thank you for joining us today. Hope you learned something, and we apologize for all the background noise.